All right, it's the last study of Joshua, and I'm a little disappointed in Bruce Gilstrap this evening because he was already ready to get to chapter 24 last week, and now he's not here when we're supposed to be talking about chapter 24. This week it was kind of surprising, at least to me, how easily this lesson came, just because it's the lesson we've been or I at least have been trying to build to. I'm hoping all of you have been building to the same kind of conclusion to the study as well. But what I put in there for our focus of attention, I kind of thought of the exercise of think of the last thing you would want to share with someone. Or if you had the ability to go back and before someone moved away, or you got in a fight with a friend, or whatever it is, if you could change what the last thing you said to someone was, how would you say that? What would the message be? How would you intend to express something like that? And kind of, I bring it up because often we don't get a chance to really control what we say, or we always have the chance to control what we say, but we don't get to control what our last message is to someone. And so, unlike Joshua, who kind of controlled what his last words were to the Israelites, we often have things that we wish we didn't say or we didn't have as our last memory of or last conversation with someone. And so, as we jump in this week, I kind of wanted us to think about what are some of those things that we would say to maybe if we were moving away, what would the last thing be you said to a Bible class or to your family here at Green Lawn or whatever it may be? Because I think, one, this exercise is important because Joshua is doing that very thing. He knows his time is limited and he is making one final address, and then we'll get to the last 4 verses, and he died and he was buried at this location, and so was also buried at this location, and we get the list. But if you are willing to share, what would some of those last comments or points that you would try and make to, say, your family here at Greenlawn? What would those last couple comments be before you left or moved away, or if we want to go that far, died? What would the last thing you wanted them to hear from you be? It's all right. You guys don't have to share. I just seeing who is going to be daring this evening. Robbie, it does look like you want to say something.
Oh, we did. Well, I hope it would be in a situation where I'm in control of my thoughts and feelings and such as that. Not under medicine, for example, or something like that. And it would also depend on who I'm talking to. I would say certain things to my wife that I wouldn't say to anyone else. And I would also say something to members here at Greenlawn that I wouldn't say to just anybody.
Sure.
Because of the tie that we have and such as that. So it's a challenging question that you put forth there. You put really thought into it. But I'd also think, hey, we're going to have eternity to talk to.
Sure.
And we'll be able to discuss anything we need to. My concept of heaven, anyway.
Sure.
Is that we'll know each other and speak such as that. And that's something to be excited about too. And I would think there that we'd be talking about, remember back at Greenlawn when such and such happened? This happened, we laughed, or we cried, and it was all for nothing. We didn't see what was important. So in that respect, it would be quite a conversation. So those are my thoughts.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing. We'll go ahead and jump in to chapter 24. And would someone like to read verses 1 through 13?
Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your forefathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the river and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the river and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. And I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau. But Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your fathers out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the desert for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them from before you, and you took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you. Also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build. And you live in them and eat from the vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant."
All right, thank you, Mike. So here we are again. We're back at Shechem. It's where we ended chapter 8 with. So it's been almost 2 months probably since we've even really been in this location in the story of Joshua. And they're sitting between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, where we pronounced on one there's going to be blessings, and on the other there's going to be curses. And Joshua is giving an account of the history of Israel. And he's emphasizing stories from Genesis and the life of Moses, and even the life of Joshua. But what about how it's retold stands out to you? Or is there anything that stands out to you?
It's God talking, and there's a lot of I of him reminding them, I did this. You didn't do it. I did this. And then there's this thing. Oh, and I did that too for you. So it's just reminding them they're where they're at by the grace of God.
I think there's a reminder there too. I mean, at the very end in 13, he's 12. I took them out, not by your sword. Going back to, like, you didn't do anything for me to pick you.
Yeah.
It's not because of your numbers, not because of your size, not that I chose you. Similar.
Sure.
Well, it's interesting, he starts out, talking about Abraham. Makes it very clear, he was serving other gods. He wasn't chosen by God because of anything he was doing. God saw something in him and went after him. I think that's interesting. Sometimes we tend to forget that he was, his father-in-law supposedly was a maker of onions, not father-in-law, his father. According to some of the stories.
You know, he's telling this story to a new generation too, of people. People who may not have heard it the last time it was told. When Moses told it.
Yeah.
So it's important that they hear everything from Abraham, who was their patriarch of their
Sure.
people. And describe everything that has happened and how he did it. Because some of those guys may not have experienced it.
It's a good point. And we're kind of already hitting on it. That question I put down there, I put it in there so those who want to set up our next quarter can. Next quarter we are starting a study of Genesis through the summer. And so I think it would be a worthwhile question to ask, why is it important that in the retelling of the story of Israel, that they start in Genesis? Well, you even see it in the New Testament. Why is it important that we start the retelling of the history of Israel, God's people, in the New Testament, in Genesis? Well, because that's the beginning, and there's so much that we learn from that, especially in the relationships with God and Abraham, and God and Isaac and Jacob, and you get into Joseph, and it sets so much up for the biblical narrative that Genesis, of course, is the natural starting point, right? The beginning is the clear starting point.
But there's something else going on here.
Okay.
When you see God making covenant with people, it's a legal process in which both sides have to be identified in sort of I don't want to use the word legal all the time, but that capacity.
Sure.
And so you've got one side of the covenant here, which is obviously God, and yes, he's describing things that are going on here, things that he's done to help Israel fulfill the promises that he's made to them. But it's kind of like a prologue. This is what I've done for you. This is, how I treated these people, and etc., etc. It's kind of an introduction to, I've still been faithful to you, Israel, just like I said I would be to Moses. I've been faithful to Joshua, and I will continue to be. The reasons that I'm going to be faithful are the same, okay, and the conditions are very much the same as well. And so that first section there is kind of what I see as being that sort of prologue to the whole of this covenant situation. A little bit like Exodus, I think it's Exodus 34, where God even reveals his name, and it's in several verses there. Steadfast God, merciful, and all these things. I mean, if you've ever had a contract, that's what it would say on that party there.
Sure.
That would be God's name, and then there'd be our name here, and then all the conditions attached. So that's how I picture this. It's very much sort of yours history. A lot of it happened in Philadelphia, didn't it? In that famous room.
Sure.
But yeah, that's kind of this situation here. And then you've got the signers, but God's doing his part in that first part. Okay, I've been faithful to you. Now you need to be faithful to me, so that because they've got a part to play. We have a part to play in the fulfillment of God's promises. He will be faithful whether we're faithful or not. We know that, but that's what I see happening here.
Sure. Also, I mean, it's an oral tradition. We don't practice this as much. It's an oral tradition, and so this is not the first or the last time that this is going to be. I mean, you go whatever the distance is between here and Stephen's going to give the same speech for the most part, except that he's going to go, and you killed Jesus. You know, Peter's going to give the same speech, and you killed Jesus, right? I mean, like, it's going to be there. It's an oral culture. They have to keep telling the story. You don't keep telling the story dies.
The story has to have a connection,
That's right. Yeah.
some kind of context. Why did we teach history in this country? Did the U.S. just kind of start with our generation? No. All these people came before and did these things. So it provided the connectivity of why you're here. You know, yeah, you didn't know these people, but you need to know the history. You need to hear the story about all these people.
Build pride and patriotism. And
Sure.
Some good, some bad, but
Yeah. But because the younger generation, they may not know. They may have heard stories one way or the other, but they need to know who they are in terms of how they fit in with all these series of people and God.
God makes it real personal too. I mean, he says when you, but when he starts listing out, it's real interesting here. Even when he talks about Abraham, he made a choice. Like Abraham, he said, Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor. Well, Abraham. And then you get down to Jacob and Esau, and it says, I assigned the hill country to Esau, but I sent, but Jacob went down to Egypt. And then all along the way, you know, these people that went to Egypt.
But what does that show
were
you?
delivered.
That shows you that none of this happened by happenstance. It wasn't an accident. This was God's, his plan.
So when he gets down here where he's saying you, he's talking about them, and it's his plan for them.
Right.
He was telling the story, not Joshua.
Well, and these
And it
qualified.
tells his faithfulness from the beginning up till then.
Right.
The next thing that happens is the challenge. What's their faithfulness?
And that's what all other religions lack. They don't have a story because they don't have a God that's ever revealed himself or reminded them or said, hey, do you remember this? You know, what we were doing here.
Exactly.
And that's what's so great and awesome about things like that. I mean, I love sections like this.
Well, even
Where
where
God
we're
comes
at
back
today.
and he's not afraid to tell you the good and the bad. I mean, the kings in Babylon or whatever, they only ever recorded the good things they did, you know, and you know, they scrubbed everything else. But they'd also go back and do what a lot of our universities are trying to do now. They go back and try and rewrite history, which is absolutely fatal to a country's identity. You know, the redactors better be very careful in what they do.
Seeing that in real time.
Yeah, so there's a warning there as well.
In the retelling of this story of God, or God's relationship with Israel, the main point, or at least I noticed this, and I'm sure some of you did as well, the main point doesn't seem to be the law. However, we know, and we kind of hit on this last week, of the law will become the cornerstone for the Israelites, especially we look into the New Testament, it's right there. The Jews are quick to clamor to the law of Moses, what Moses has taught us. However, that's not what is central here in God's retelling of the story. Why do you think that is? What added significance is it on these stories from of God's relationship compared to the law?
The law is irrelevant without God. I mean, it's useless. God supersedes the law. He's more important than anything. And so he's starting with what's most important. Because later they're going to get law and they're going to go through the motions, and it's going to make God sick.
Sure.
Because they're forgetting the whole reason behind it. Love God, know God, glorify God. They'll be proud of him.
Well, he can't talk right now, so.
We talked about that a little bit last week, though. You know, when Joshua says, "Be very strong and careful to obey the law." It is how we go about it. It was given as a guide.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it talks about specific, but this is the overarching thing. God is God. and he's talking about his deliverance.
All right. Anything else coming out of this section before we move on?
The obstructors, the enemies, the ones that would like to see God's promises fail are many, and they try in many different ways to thwart his plans. So it really shows me that Israel, they can't do this without God. And I know you're all wondering, what is that hornet in verse 12? Whatever weapon that is, I want to see it in action.
Is it an angel from previous, long time ago?
Could be. But hornets, I don't want to get hornets here.
And they
But,
feared that they had to, for no reason, unsubstantiated fear.
right.
Could have been
Well, hornets.
no reason for them to be afraid, except they were.
Hornets in England are a subspecies of wasp, and I had a bad experience several times with them because they don't just try and sting you; they go for your head, and they really, trust me, they really hurt. You know when you've been stung by a hornet, but I can just imagine that sort of feeling going on. What's happening here?
On a different note, Bergan, going back to the very first question that only Robbie answered, I was thinking about Paul in Acts chapter 20 and his farewell speech to the Ephesians, right? There's so much of it that is, I don't want to say copied, that he's copying from Joshua, but it's not far. Just, it's here's the story, here's what I told you, here's what's going to happen. This is going to happen. These things you've been charged with this duty, this job, this responsibility. You have a responsibility now. I'm leaving. It's just, I feel like if there's a pattern of what do you do when you leave, Maybe I'll do that when I leave tonight. I don't know. I'll make my speech.
Leave with a clear conscience.
That's right. When he says that, I am innocent of the blood of all men. Except for Stephen's.
Well, not. He didn't do it without tears, did he?
That's right.
Yeah, good.
So I had a question about the timeline exactly of when chapters 23 and 24 are occurring
Together.
oh, together. But in relation to have the tribes at the time that Joshua is giving this already gone to their lands of inheritance and then been called back for this speech, or and when you look at chapter 23 and you look at chapter 13, there's a very, very close correlation to what's being said.
Sure.
And if you look at those chapters where the lands are allotted, and then there's a statement at the end saying that they weren't able to drive out these people, or that they were unable to drive them completely out. Looking at each one of those allotments as this is where the land was allotted as a bullet point explanation, and this is what happened with them eventually when they went there. But it doesn't appear that it's a historical or a chronological order of, so Judah, when Judah was given this land, everybody went out, but they weren't able to drive them out. And they came back, and Joshua said, okay, so this is the allotment for the next tribe. Everybody go out and fight and then come back. And so it really looks like bullet point explanations of this is where the land is going to be, and there's kind of a little concluding statement related to that allotment. Along with, in Judges chapter 1, it says, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites? It's as though Joshua's statements, and even looking back up into chapter 24, verse 28, says, after he gives this charge to them, he says, then Joshua sent the people away, each to his own inheritance. So my mind raises that question, had they even gone to their lands of inheritance yet? Or just simply been to the cities and the areas that God had promised as the promised land and driven them completely out? Because we also have that explanation back in, what chapter was that? Well, back in chapter 11, it says Joshua, he left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. That's in verse 15. In verse 20, he says, for it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts. Verse 23, so Joshua took the entire land just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. So it sounds like everything had already been delivered. Everything that God had promised as the promised land, the initial them coming in to possess the land, had been done, but there's still a task for them to complete after the land is divided or the allotments are given for their inheritance. And now, if this charge that he's giving them in chapters 23 and chapter 24 is actually at that initiating point to go out and fight and conquer completely and drive the rest of the people out, then it makes a lot of sense for him to go back and say, remember, God did all of these things, going back to bringing you out of Egypt and bringing you into the promised land. He's the one that did this. Now, as he gets ready to give the final charge in verses 14 and following, he's saying, choose you this day who you're going to serve and go out and complete the task that is at hand. And so in some ways, to me, it makes sense that this would be prior to their fully occupying the different allotments of land. even though they had come into possession of the promised land through the destruction of the cities and the driving out of all those kings that were listed in chapter 13. But it makes a lot of sense. We talked in our class last week about a change in leadership and things that are beneficial when there's a change in leadership. And sometimes it's going back and establishing, don't forget what your foundation is. God did all of this for you. And now we see this again expanded on a little bit further in these beginning chapters, that God did all this for you.
Judges 3, though, says, now, these are the nations the Lord left. Why did he leave them? To test Israel by them, that is, all in Israel who had not experienced all the wars in Canaan. It was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. Because this conquest had been going on for a generation. So one of the reasons that, I think it's Levi Hamath, the Lebanon of today, he'd left some of the Canaanites up there, and then I think the other main one was Philistia. But God left them for two purposes: to test the faithfulness of the people, we know how that turned out, but also to help train the people that were coming. So it was still a work in progress. I mean, they've done a lot.
Right.
But yeah, like you say, it's time to
There's still,
back, but he
there's
doesn't
still
have-
work to be done.
Yeah, but he doesn't. It's not like when Moses handed the reins to Joshua. Joshua had been his, what you call, apprentice for 40 years in the wilderness. It's a long apprenticeship. But there isn't anyone to hand it to. He doesn't hand it to Phineas, probably because he's of the Levite tribe. But now it's going to be the tribal elders, I guess.
Oh, it says the tribe.
Yeah.
He summons the tribe. The tribes, their elders or leaders, judges, and officials.
So it's now
So that's.
now the Republic.
And it says after, the allotment in 22, it talked about the east tribes going home.
Mm-hmm.
So you would think that the people went to their areas at some point, and then he summoned them back.
Along with those hornets. And over in Exodus, it also says, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw them into confusion.
Yeah,
And I'm like, what is that just a mind game?
I think that's the same word
It's the
in
same
Hebrew.
word.
So it's got its multiple translation.
Yeah. It's like, what? The hornets and my terror? And I'm just like, woo.
On Roger's question, I do have a question there. Joshua 23:1, now it came about after many days of the Lord, he calls them to him, right? And in 24, then Joshua gathered all the tribes. So is this two separate farewell addresses? And that was kind of my question. It's like, is there two separate farewell addresses? Is this all the same? And is it needing to be, he's like, hey, we've written a lot here on chapter 23, we've written a lot here. Let's remind everybody that we have gathered them all together. I don't know, but it seems to, the way it's written, at least in English, is he's gathered them twice. And he's old in both of them, it seems like. Or, I don't know. I mean, maybe 24 is not the old one. Maybe 24 just fits better in the narrative in terms of dismiss them to their inheritance and then he dies. Whereas really the death and the burial fit after 23. 24 should have been put in place of chapter 12, like in front of 12. I don't know. Gather all the people, you tell them they need to go conquer the land, you bring them back together after they've conquered some of the land, and you tell them in chapter 23 that he's going to kick you off the good land if you don't, and then you die. I don't know.
You're bringing up some great questions. I have no idea. I had always just assumed Joshua keeps summoning the people again and again and again because there's a reason. And we saw even in the early chapters of Joshua, they're right there with them and they don't understand what's happening. We just crossed the Jordan on dry ground and you're already you're already thinking God has forsaken you at the Battle of Jericho. We haven't even gone into the land. We haven't gone up to battle yet, and yet you saw a miracle there. It's remnant of the story of the miracles you've seen happen before, and yet you're not willing to go march in the land. We need to get back into the huddle. We need to have the moment of, remember, this is the law. There's blessings and cursings, because Joshua does that several times too. He gets the people together and reminds them, God has told us what we need to do to be blessed. He's told us what will happen if we do these things, then we'll receive curses. And so again, I do think 23 and 24 are two separate occasions. I do think that they're towards the end of Joshua's life. Where exactly this is in the conquest, I have no idea. But clearly there's something about, in 23, he is wanting to make sure the next generation of leaders understands there's a way that I've been leading that you guys need to adapt and follow my example. And then 24, I always took it as he's bringing together more than just the leaders again. He's bringing the people back together into this spot. And so for maybe some of the younger generation, they weren't there in chapter 23, or they weren't there in chapter 12, or they weren't there at chapter 8, but they're back at a familiar spot for the older generations. And he's basically, as a representative of the older generations, telling them in the same spot he told them in chapter 8, there are blessings and cursings. There's a way of leadership that I've been taking on. There's a covenant relationship that we are responsible for maintaining. This is no longer on me because I'm 110 years old and I'm about to die. It is now on you guys, the young people, to figure out what to do and how to lead. Because again, Judges describes some of the kings that are described in the list in chapter 12. They're not conquered until Judges, but it's conquered by Joshua in chapter 12. And there's moments of lands. Joshua and Judges aren't very clear on when the timeline happens. It doesn't help that they keep jumping years in advance, and then they'll jump backwards, and then they'll jump back forward. And so it's one of those, I don't know where chapter 23 and chapter 24 fall into the scheme. They don't have an author like Luke who took meticulous notes on exactly when everything happened. And even then, he doesn't give dates. It's just a general, well, of course, Jesus was born before he died. And everything in between there happened in that order.
Well, the Israelites, Hebrew writing is they're not linear thinkers. They are more, this is about events and the significance of events. Plus there's still, I see from here, looking at the beginning of 24, yes, all the tribes are gathered to Shechem, but he summons the elders, the heads, the judges. This idea of federal headship is still big.
Sure.
And so the importance of leadership comes out there, doesn't it? And it's still important today. Shepherds are holders of authority and responsibility for the congregation, for those that they shepherd. So that's very much insinuated here, I think.
Sure.
Because if the leaders are bad, what chance is there for the rest of the people? But I think the two things may be quite close together, but I don't know how much that matters in the scheme of things.
In the history of, we're at what, 600 years, 10 years is close, right? It's not a quick turnaround as we think of it, but it is close in the grand scheme of the history of Israel up to this point. And so, all that to say, I have no idea. I don't know how to answer your questions.
I do think it's important to just note that it has to be reviewed
Sure.
pretty frequently, even if it was 10 years or And the importance of doing that through the generations.
Sure.
You know, to repeat those things, because he highlights just how easy it is to turn away.
All right, time to get to the rest of the chapter. I'll go ahead and read to close us out. Starting in verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve. Whether it is the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites whose land you now dwell. But for me and my house I will serve the Lord. Then the people answered, Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who has brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great things and signs in our sight, and preserved us in all the way that went, and among all the people through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore we will also serve the Lord, for he is our God. But Joshua said to the people, You are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and do you harm and consume you, after having done you good. And the people said to Joshua, No, but we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said to the people, You are witness against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord and served him. And they said, We are witnesses. He said, Then put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, The Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and put in place statutes and rules for them at Shechem. And then Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and took a large stone and set it up there under the terebinth that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, Behold, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord that he spoke to us. Therefore it shall be a witness against you, lest you deal falsely with your God. So Joshua sent the people away, every man to his inheritance. After these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in his own inheritance at Timnath-Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountains of Gash. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, and had known all the work that the Lord had done for Israel. As for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried at Shechem, in the piece of land that Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance to the descendants of Joseph. And Eleazar the son of Aaron died, and they buried him in Gibeah, the town of Phinehas his son, which has been given to him in the hill country of Ephraim. And that's the end. So out of that last section, or not that very last section, because I couldn't find much out of there that was worth making comments on, but the section about choosing this day who you will serve, what stood out to you guys? And what are your thoughts, comments, questions?
I didn't know stones could hear.
Well, when Jesus was coming into Jerusalem the last time, Pharisees told him to hush his people up. He said, If I hush them up, the stones will speak. So yeah, I guess stones can hear. They can speak.
Not the last time we've seen a memorial stone of sorts. It's a common theme throughout Joshua. Not the last time that they have witnessed against or for something.
Verse 23. He said, "Then put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel." Are they keeping foreign gods with them?
Like Rachel, the household gods. Never really got over it till captivity.
Well, we even see it in the history of the kings. One king can go through and destroy all of the idols, but then, the standing stones remain, or certain idols remain, or they will remove the high places, but they'll forget one thing or the other. And it's one of those, at least for me, those kind of questions are for all the good that being sent out into the desert to be purified and to de-Egyptify, or whatever, however you want to phrase what's happening when Moses is teaching the Israelites the law. Clearly there is a desire to remain idol worshippers amongst the Israelites. Even in the witness of, we have seen the land being handed over to us by God, someone is still sitting there and making an idol or a graven image because, well, what would the big deal be? It's just one person having an idol. Well, to Joshua, it's saying that is a death warrant. God will turn, he may have done good for you, but he will turn against you because of your dedication to idols. And I think, again, kind of going back into that first bit of the chapter, they have to keep being reminded of this because they aren't getting it even now. Joshua has to remind them, don't have idols in the nation of Israel. Because if you have idols, God will turn against you. You're actively going against God and rejecting God. So God will stop blessing you because you've rejected him.
I mean, the serving God, which they're clearly wanting to do. I mean, they make an oath of allegiance there in the next verse. But then there's serving God, I mean, what Dale said the other week, wholeheartedly, because there's a different spirit in you. That to me is what he's trying to encourage them to be wholehearted, to have that different spirit. Because when they do, that's when those pieces of wood or gold or whatever they are that have been fashioned, not important. But they don't ever quite get that.
I think it just speaks to the difficulty of faith over reason. Faith is hard because it defies reason.
Yeah. Don't
And they want
disagree.
these idols something tangible because that's what reason says.
It's like the amulets that protect me kind of thing. Because they're fighting some pretty nasty stuff out there.
I think I might take the contrary view here on 23. I don't know, certainly not to say that the Israelites are not capable or they are serving foreign gods, but I do wonder if it's just saying you still have a task to do, right? If you, use verse 20, if you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm, right? So it doesn't seem like Joshua is saying they are at the moment, but they have them among them. They're about to go in and have to defeat the Canaanites. They're going to have to go defeat foreign gods that are among them. And he could have just as well said, I guess, is now therefore put away the Canaanites. I mean, in some ways, but I think there's a certain tie here is who are you going to serve? And are you going to serve those foreign gods of the people that you're about to go conquer? Or are you going to serve? And there's probably you could say there's foreshadowing here. So I don't necessarily indicate it as you've got them in your midst and you're already in sin, or more so it's you've got people you've got to conquer still. But
Some of these guys were still mixed in there. Like the
Well, the
Gibeonites.
Jebusites,
I was
the-
thinking about the Gibeonites. He made that treaty with them, and
Yeah.
so God protected those people. So some of those things were still out there, and most likely mixed up.
I don't think that's a contrary view. I just think that's worth saying because it's embellishing what we've already said.
I'm just glad we don't have idols today. That would be rough.
thank goodness that's over and done.
You know, these guys are idiots.
That's Weird Al.
They don't know what they're doing. We know God, so we don't struggle with this.
It's constant.
Do we?
Constantly.
Or do we not know God? Or do we not trust Him?
This, where we started that conversation last week, and I think I'll bring it back up this week, is when Joshua gave that warning and said, if you don't drive them out, then they will remain as snares, as traps, as whips. And asked the question, what snares, traps, and whips do we see in our lives today? How can we identify them? How can we avoid them? Or how can we get rid of them?
You forgot the thorns.
Yeah, the thorns, yeah.
The point of
In the form.
The hard part is
bringing this up at 5 minutes.
that's right. The hard part is you go to like Isaiah 46. I think it's Isaiah 46. He's talking about the fact that it's like you make this idol, you put it on the back of the mule, you have to carry it, you have to load it and unload it, and you're going to worship this thing that somebody made. And the insidious thing is that we can't. Most of the things that we struggle with, we don't load up on the mule. We don't, we just think about it as normal, natural, everyday life, and we just it embeds itself in the culture so quickly, or in our own homes or our own lives. It's hard to.
We don't load it up on a mule, we load it up on an iPhone.
That's right. Yeah, right. But it's harder to see, I think, in some ways.
Right.
He says this multiple times though in this set of passages. When it's almost like they're going back and forth saying Joshua's saying this is what I'm gonna do in my household, and the people are going back and forth on it.
Does he sound a bit like Moses at the end of
Yes.
Deuteronomy?
Yeah, and in 19,
Tongue in cheek.
Joshua says, you are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He's a jealous God. It's like they're going back and forth. And the people say, no, we will serve the Lord. It's that back and forth.
The practical application question that Mike brings up is, as Joshua is saying, choose this day who you'll serve. How do we choose this day who we'll serve? What does that practically look like? We're choosing to get rid of idols, and we're choosing to follow a holy God. How do we practically do that? That'll give you some good discussion in this process.
Yeah. Is there a pill for that?
There's an app for that.
Oh, no. Can't afford it.
I know we spent some time in that last week, just the conversation of what does it look like, and it's chapter 23, verse 11. So take diligent heed to yourselves to love the Lord your God, cling to Him, don't cling to the worthless idols, right? Like that's the way, but we don't. That's
Yeah, look what he said to the remnant
You won't.
of these nations. That answers our previous question.
Yeah.
It's the ones that you've left among you
Yeah.
that are going to be the snare.
So,
Yeah. And Joshua's got a bit of, what's the word? Skin in that game, hasn't he? Because he was the one that was also guilty of making a treaty with the Gibeonites. So.
do you ever think Joshua was like, glad I'm about to die and leave it to this generation? It's gonna be this is gonna be hard for those guys. You know, I mean, if we do that to our kids now, then it's like, whew, it's gonna be hard in the next 30 years. Oh,
Well, Hezekiah.
thank goodness I'll be gone. You know, like Joshua was saying the same thing. Whew, next 30 years, it's gonna be hard. Thank goodness I'm not gonna be here.
That's what Hezekiah did, and God made him live an extra 12 years.
Congratulations.
But yes.
Yeah, he did.
All right. Thank y'all for being willing to teach, study with us this quarter. I hope you guys enjoy closing it out this week. So that's all I got. I'll let you guys out a minute and a half early.